Welcome to Portals of Perception and to the Universalis Project number 1. I'm here with Karen Heney and Kyriaki Nikandrou. They are each an artist, a philosopher, and a spiritual teacher, each on their own account. And together we are embarking on the Universalis Research Project. Karen, Kyriaki, welcome. So, the sense of today, this being the first episode, is to offer a bit of a context and to embark on a journey trace to place this project inside its origin story so that we can feel the momentum that's building into this project. Anything you would like to offer before I bring series of slides and begin to walk us through the story? It'd be a good time to offer some sense from you, please.
Yes. Hello, Aviv. Hello, Karen. It's great to be with you today. And I want to say that I'm very captured about the idea of evolution and of the human species going through various stages, let's say, of awakening, activation, change, new birth, and transformation. And I was always captured by this. That's the reason why I studied history and archaeology. And I'm recently in a research on the various ideas about evolution and the future. And I was always also fascinated by the idea of Homo Universalis embodied by Leonardo da Vinci, that he managed to capture many different capacities, and he was master in various domains, and maybe that's why his art is so special, because he was also a scientist, philosopher, painter, engineer, esoteric person, and many other things. So I'm currently researching how these ideas are evolved after the Renaissance in various traditions, including the Jung theories about Aquarian age, or even more esoteric ideas from various esoteric groups, what they believe. And I find it fascinating. So I'm really looking forward to diving deeper into this domain.
Hello, Kyriaki. Hello, Aviv. Thank you very much for your introduction. And I think along parallel really to the researches that you're involved in, I've always had a love of pattern, and in terms of exploring these dimensions through art, it's one facet of this research, but it's quite captivating as the natural laws and the natural patterns are all part of the integration between the human, the planet, the universe, and everything else that we are trying to discover, that work together in a harmony. And it's been a great love of mine and passion to try to, in some way, encapsulate some of these core dimensions that are integral to themselves, such as color and shape, but they work together and they work throughout everything. And I think following such threads are ways of accessing things that have greater truths, in a way, at the end of the threads, as well as here. and bringing them together. So this is an exploration that I'm involved in, and hopefully as this journey unfolds together, there'll be opportunities to share more of this research with some of the art. And it's always seemed very important that things that we do somehow count and have a kind of inherent purpose within them. It's very easy to make pretty pictures and patterns, and I'm not refuting the wonderful things that have been made throughout history, but at this point in time, at this edge of where humanity is, it's another way of possibly opening up some further possibilities. So I'll leave it at that for now. So thank you for the opportunity to have an introduction.
Yeah, yes. Beautiful, because you are each bringing a particular line of inquiry and study and exploration. And the way we got together into this project is that over the last couple of years, I have been conducting series of conversations with Jeff van der Kloot. Particularly, we recorded typically right after an intensive weekend work with a global community, and I will describe the journey in a little bit. And on one of the recent calls, which we titled The 1,000 Faces of Homo Universalis, we developed a slide that sampled those 1,000 faces by showing, if I remember correctly, 20 different faces. And in a bit, I'll bring the slide on screen so we'll be able to see it. At the end of that run through this sample, Jeff said, well, it looks to me like there is potentially work to be developed and turn these into cards. And I was intrigued by the idea of bringing into it color and symbol and shape. We didn't think we were gonna, and we don't think we're gonna create a new tarot. That's not necessarily the objective, but it was intriguing enough. And I reached out to the two of you because of your involvement in the Portals Project, because of your involvement in the Epoch journey, and because of your own personal journey in your own areas of inquiry. And I thought, let's try to embark on this together. And we literally started to work on the first, well, so let me bring it up on screen so we see what we're talking about. Okay, so okay, can we see this? So, yeah, the Universalis Project, and the Universalis Project number 1, where what I realized on the approach to today was that it will make sense to put it inside a context, inside the origin story, and that the best way to do this is to do a journey trace, which will be a little bit of my personal journey trace in this case, because, well, it will provide the most open, honest, and transparent story as to how this arose. So this was the slide that we developed in the conversation with Jeff. And what we decided, the three of us, was that it would make sense to begin with inquiring into space makers. Why space makers? Why would you begin an inquiry into Homo Universalis and what Homo Universalis is about through spacemakers. Why is that the first space inside this loom in the first place? Actually, let me pause here and give you a chance. I know you have, each one of you, researched and already are deep in that inquiry, but perhaps even before because what I intend to do is to place this entire inquiry in its origin story. But what would you offer at this point? You were not prepared for it. You didn't know that I was going to put you on the spot, but that's part of the way we are doing this live. What would you offer as a starter consideration for the idea of space making and space maker?
I'll have a go. It popped into my head the other morning. I asked myself afresh, and it's a very simple answer, which can be filled up with a huge amount. And I thought about it: if something, some being, entity, origination from the realms that caused human life to exist, wanted to communicate and wanted to talk to us. And from the human perspective, if we were as we are, on a spiritual quest and somehow wanted to communicate with a higher causative originating realms, then we would need space. We would need an arena in which to facilitate that communication, as it were. As I said, it's a very simple premise, but then it's, well, how does it work? What does that space entail? What order of human development does it require, or application, endeavor? And from causative higher realms, what would be their reasoning? Why would they want to communicate? What is at play? So that was a very simple beginning.
Wonderful. That's totally wonderful. Thank you. Kyriaki, anything you'd offer?
Yeah, I want to say that it's very good what Karen said. Nothing can run in a full cup, so you need to create space for something new to appear. And but one thought that I had recently is that we perceive a space in a very material way, whilst maybe there are other ways to perceive space. I mean, for example, there might be space inside the brain, let's say, inside the scalp. It's the same space. It doesn't mean that we need to grow the head, but maybe inside that space, not everything is activated. So not all the space is occupied. So this is a recent perception. And also that maybe another way to create space, I was thinking about to colonize, to create a colony. But also not also only in terms of physical, but what does this mean, let's say, in ideas or in other things, in essences? So these are some ideas that turn up today about space.
So each one of you, in several ways, you just offered the end destination we're heading to, which is beautiful, because it allows us to now put the journey in context with the seeding from both of you in terms of the context of the inquiry. So let me bring this up again. So So I realized that it was going to be necessary to find a way to put it in context, the why and where and how and what is the origin story of the inquiry into space making and space makers. And to put it in context, I have realized that I really need to look at a journey trace in an abbreviated way, at least a part in an abbreviated supersonic way, and then in a little more detailed way, some of the specific run-up. So, run-up to the project. So, in 1980, I was 21 years old, or 21 years young, and I was a fighter pilot in the Israeli Air Force, and I felt that I've achieved, in that sense, something unique, and at the same time, there was a burning fire inside me that was to do with something else, and it led me to embark on a conscious spiritual quest, conscious spiritual journey. And I've been consistently on that journey where whatever I was doing in the Air Force and then whatever I was doing in other places, that was where the center of my passion was anchored. And 21 years later, it was 2001, I was in the US already with my family, and it was time for me to actualize the promissory note that I wrote to my wife Sarah, where I told her the material question will be addressed, will be answered out of my developmental and spiritual quest. I promised that years earlier when we got together, and I now needed to deliver the goods. And so the work I've been doing for, by that time, a couple of decades, teaching and coaching in the personal growth and personal development arena, I said I will parachute to the top of the business world and lead a differentiated coaching and consulting and leadership programs. Easier said than done. And that story is already accounted in several places on portals, especially in a writing that we called The Backstory. So I'm now running forward in the story, and I very luckily, I was very lucky to be able to emerge out of the 08-09 financial crisis in a way that launched my consulting practice to a whole new possibility. That was a time, 07, 08, 09, where more than 50% of coaching and consulting services went out of business because corporations, the first thing they did, they shut down any coaching and consulting budgets. I was able to, through this, transition the focus of my work from leadership to strategy and innovation. So I found a way to engage with senior leaders in some of the most admired companies in the world in what they saw to be mission critical. And so I was able to emerge out of that crisis with a line of sight to creating for my family financial freedom. So this is where I pick the story here. So around about 2012, 2013, I felt that I was reaching the end of my map. And what I mean by that is not that I fulfilled all my development opportunities. There are plenty of development opportunities all around me in terms of the areas that I could develop, blind spots that I carried, qualities and virtues that I wanted to develop. But what I mean by that is that the map that I have acquired and developed in the first 3 decades of my journey, it was as though I could travel more inside the territory, but I would drive to the edge of something, and I was like a searcher reaching land's end, literally, getting to a point that the GPS in the car I was driving reached its end. There was no further insight. And again, that is not to mean that there wasn't tremendous depth opportunity to be developed. But there was something about the map that I felt, and I didn't know at the time yet how to think about it. It more appeared as through the sense of tremendous restlessness and a sense that I needed to do something about it. Now, right at that time, I was just breaking through in this personal and financial freedom project, because it was at that time that I had line of sight to how I could make the 30 or 40 years financial development for our family in the 12 or 15 years that I essentially designed for myself, such that I would be free to do what I felt my life was about. So that then led to what I describe as a period from 2014 to 2016, where the world was experiencing increasing confusion and turmoil. Europe was fragmenting. Actually, earlier on, where Kyriaki is, in Greece, there was a whole other economic crisis. And on a different episode, I'm sure you could tell us that story and how you experienced it. I also experienced internally what initially appeared as reaching the end of my map became tremendously agitating, especially in light of what then was building into the 2015-2016. In the world, Europe was experiencing increasing fragmentation. The US saw the rise of Donald Trump. The UK went through the Brexit. The Chinese started to take more of an assertive posture. Xi Jinping was beginning to reveal more of his assertive agenda. So when you looked at the global stage, and I realized that I needed to completely retrace and challenge everything about my belief system. Not just my high-level beliefs, but I needed to investigate and interrogate the beliefs that supported those beliefs. And I've chosen to, at that time, to embark on a journey that I call the study of the human stop situation scenarios. And I wasn't going to approach it in the way you would approach a research in the academic context, where you take a grant and you describe the various experiments you were going to do. I've chosen to approach that project in a contemplative, meditative way, where I will position myself with all the tools that I've practiced and developed in the previous 3 decades to inquire at the deepest level I could into what the case was for the human at this time. At the archetypal level, at the akashic level, at the constitutional formation of what a human being is and the covenant of life on planet Earth. And so one of the first stop situations that I embarked on was the distrust stop situation. It was based on the appreciation and the understanding that we humans, we've developed almost as a built-in nature, distrust. But see, I've never fully believed the myth of the selfish gene and the myth that told the story that because we came through the line of evolutionary biology, we were carrying the jungle genes of needing to fight each other for survival. And that because of that, our very nature was distrustful. I never believed that story fully. First of all, because when you look at nature and other species, you see that they have other behaviors. And more importantly, the realization that, and the deep conviction that we humans, in our very nature, we were caring, generous, empathetic species. We were capable of generosity and gratitude. And I've asked myself, so with this nature of distrust, how much is it our true nature, or how much is this the accumulative byproduct of the injurious nature of the human story? And then, what is the actuality of the ability to dissolve in oneself and with others this trust, to truly build trustful relationship, say in a communal situation? And I've been, by the time, working for many years with several communities, so it wasn't just an intellectual inquiry, it was something that I've grappled with in the facilitation and the work, both in the work I was doing in the personal growth space, and when, by the time, I was working with senior executive teams, and I said, what can I do to facilitate a team to truly make a profound leap in terms of their capacity to collaborate and trust each other? So there was a dimension that I've developed in the work I was doing with these executives about trust and how to dramatically accelerate the trust and, in a way, escape the stop situation of this trust. So as I proceeded in this journey, the bigger context was, well, really the conditioning stop situation. How much are we humans are held back by our conditioning, both at a personal level, so by your birth condition and your parents and the environment and the traumatic or not experiences of your childhood and so on and so forth, and also the overall human condition, say, of the nation you're part of, and then even in a broader sense, the bigger archetypal human story. We've recently recorded a conversation with Alexander Boehner, and he brings an interesting perspective where he says trauma had become a device, a tool, perhaps, that psychotherapy used as it became a religion, because every religion needs to have its evil. He offered that as a provocative inquiry. Now, I didn't have that perspective at the time. What I did ask was how, percentage-wise, I tried to calibrate with each of those top situations. Was it where we arrested by 60% or 70% or only 30%? And obviously the calibration, as I was writing about each one of those, the calibration was dynamic. But again, I wasn't doing the work of this at an ideation mental level. I was actually trying to process, to metabolize to the best way I can through the faculties that I have, based on the premise that all of us humans, we are connected. And given that I was immersed in the work in the business world, and I've always metabolized intensively everything in terms of the global news and world trends and so on and so forth, I've had many portals into the global unfolding human story. So I asked my interior life, the community within, if you like, and the soul orchestration of the community within, to inquire into that and to give me its calibration. And so I stayed with those stop situation scenarios, and it obviously led also to the inquiry about perception that was very much shaped by the turmoil that I experienced in the run-up in those several years, when I recognized that, well, obviously science was developing new breakthroughs in just every aspect of science, and in arts we were seeing new frontiers and new technology was emerging. But I asked a simple question, where it relates to truly appreciating the human and what human life is about, how arrested and limited is our perception, and or how open are we to truly receive new insight, new perception about the human case? And would we say that there is a stop situation meaning there is a wall beyond which we cannot see, or would we say that that wall is no longer there, or is melting by 5% or 10% or 15%? And part of the inquiry into these spaces obviously included the overall calculus, then evaluation, that you always have pioneers, people who champion new frontiers, but then are those individuals truly like stars in the dark night sky, meaning they're on their own, or is there a transference of knowledge and capacity and know-how that is able to reach more people? And then coupled with this was the inquiry about the socio-economic stop situation. That's where this entire trace from the ancient worlds and the rise of kingdoms and the feudal system and the transition gradually to first ancient empires, but then to modern empires, and the rise of through the Renaissance and the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution that led to the Industrial Revolution and to the Modernity Project, this entire paradigm that we call modern liberal democracies, very much in the way of the West, how much was that by itself an arrested condition, in that it very much centered on human life as an economic unit, even in the simple idea of calling the human the consumer. So were we operating in a socio-economic paradigm that was arrested, or was truly open to realize and integrate a broader perspective of human life? I was trying to assess and calibrate that stop situation. To what degree was it blocked? To what degree was it open? And naturally, what came into that was the leadership stop situation. Our leadership has been a central line for me in terms of inquiry for many, many decades, because of the various situations that I found myself from much earlier in my life, and because of the way I've observed my parents, and because of my curiosity about the way the world works and so on. So I've inquired deeply into what is leadership and what enables leadership, and to what degree were we still locked in the Alexander the Great Napoleonic version of leadership, and into that obviously came the question of gender, and were we still arresting half the human race. And the evaluation showed that already in the last several decades, women in leadership became one of the most important trends. But was it a fully liberated trend, or was it still arrested in its paradigm, where women needed to very much show up with a masculine nature? And even when that was broken through, still how much of the paradigmatic view of leadership was centered around a person, the solo person, the solo leader, and the stop situation that that represented. Now, so these were some of the exterior dimensions, and the study of the human stop situations also included the more interior and esoteric dimensions of wisdom traditions and esoteric schools and mystery schools. And what was it about the transmission of knowledge from teacher to student that was so precious and so important throughout the ages? And has that reached a stop situation scenario? And if yes, why? And what was the arresting nature on the teacher's side, and what was the arresting nature on the student's side? And were we experiencing already at that time the breaking or the melting of that stop situation? Or were we just being polarized to the other side of throwing the baby with the bathtub water by saying there is no need for teachers at all? Each person will become their own teacher, her or his own teacher, very much as the postmodern trend was liberating that aspiration. Obviously, by the time, powered by the advances in technology, social media, YouTube, and so on and so forth. Now, inside all that, the even deeper inquiry of the study of human stop situations was about the invisible, unseen world realms of the human association, the human interface with the blessing realms, with the causative realms, the realms of originating permission and energy that can release human life to all that we may do, all that we may perceive, all that we may be able to integrate through the realization that whatever it is we process, it has an energetic blueprint associated with it, and needs to not just be permitted in the human processing, very much like the first person that broke the 4-minute mile, and after one person break that barrier, that stop situation, other runners were able to break that, but that also together with that there would be a release of new potential. So that was really the central propulsion of the human stop situation. Were we in still arrested position where nothing new was coming online for human life, or indeed, as I was feeling, there was tremendous amount of new permission, but it needed to be translated, needed to be codified, needed to be integrated? And where would I put that calibration? That was all part of the inquiry of the human stop situation. And right there next to it was, so if there was new intelligence and new blessing and new causative permissions that were unleashed for human life and its potential and prospective evolution, where were we in terms of our capacity to connect, embody, and integrate? So there was obviously interrelationship between that inquiry and the conditioning inquiry. So those different stop situations they were interpenetrating each other. And this entire exploration in several ways culminated with an inquiry about consciousness. What was consciousness? What was it that defined and shaped consciousness? Why was it that so many were now seeking psychedelic experiences to break out of the limitations of their consciousness? And was it true for me to truly believe that you did not need to use psychedelic, that actually both the human brain in its capacity to produce the neurotransmitters and the chemistry of anything and everything that exists in the universe, and the energy field that corresponds to that, could these be sufficient to produce and facilitate the release of new kind of consciousness? Now, when I was deep inside this research, which probably at the time was not as coherent as I'm able to talk about it now, I at that point experienced that I was entering a danger zone. I was truly entering a danger zone in myself. And because the cumulative nature and the complexity wall I was experiencing nearly took me to the edge, nearly took me beyond the edge. I'm a very stable person. So it'll have to be something pretty significant to throw me out of balance. But I simply realized that I was bringing online, I was asking for too much. I was asking for too much, first on the premise that I didn't have the development, the capacity to hold what started to pour in. I just didn't have the strong enough internal constitution yet. At that point, the inner vessel was not ready yet. And secondly, more important probably, that actually the whole point of this, because see, I was not embarking on this research in an academic context where somebody live an academic life and they have some teaching assignment, but mostly they're, say, in a research and they're writing their book and such. I was operating all along that time while I was experiencing in the interior realm tremendous turmoil. I was highly functional. I was operating at the time, often managing and leading half a dozen, and some occasions 7 different complex consulting projects for Fortune 100 companies. So I'd literally be traveling all over the world, typically flying business class to get to where I needed to go to in good shape. And on the flight, I'd be working on that. And then I'd be leading the event, the strategy workshop. And when I would retreat wherever we were to the hotel room or wherever it was, Latin America, Asia, Europe, the US, I'd retreat back to the room. After a long, intensive day, this is what I would get back to, because this actually kept me energized and intact. But so what it meant was that I was not metabolizing this as concepts. I was actually highly engaged in a very intensive way with the human condition. And I was experiencing the craziness in Silicon Valley. I was experiencing the craziness in the world on many other fronts. And I needed to try to make sense of this. And that research, that project brought me to a point that I needed to back off from it, or else I endangered my stability. And when I backed off from it for a bit, it actually led me back to what I then describe as a cloister of one. Now, in actuality, what I was just describing about the study of stop situations, the stop situation scenarios, that was already a cloister of one work, and was a written document that was never published anywhere because it was not written to be published. It was more notes from the field research. I did conduct several workshops, and the workshops also proven to me that it was premature, that I was not ready in myself to actually come out with this work, and that led me to do what I call the cloister of one, to face the responsibility of living, the essence of which was twofold. The first was that I said, you've been gifted with profound teaching and teachers, and you've been gifted with so much, you cannot anymore put the responsibility on anybody else for your life. You have to take full responsibility, not just 100% responsibility, potentially 200% responsibility, which means take responsibility for your ecology and the people you are working with, not by way of taking from them the responsibility that's for them to take on, but in terms of doing whatever is humanly possible for you to address what I saw to be the responsibility of living. So that was the inner formative posture that catalyzed this next phase. The complementary impulse was a growing instinct and intuition that humanity at large we were going to enter with 2020 a massive decade of transformation. Obviously, back in 2017, 2018, I had no idea, no one had any idea about the pandemic that was going to bring the world to a halt. But I felt increasingly that there was a premonitional tone in my contemplative inquiry that 2020 was going to bring dramatic changes. And so I started to write and then record what I call the 2020 series. That work was actually done in 2017, majority in 2018, in which I tasked myself to ultimately synthesize what I was at the time coming into 40 years, nearly 40 years of spiritual developmental journey. And I said to myself, you're going to have to, for your own sake, not for anyone else's sake, you're going to have to take responsibility to seek to find the next update. Now, not because the wisdom traditions and the axial religions and bodies of work in recent centuries, all of these were important and enriching, and there was much to go to find wisdom, even in current teachers. But something about that felt insufficient. I just was at a point in my own journey that I felt that I could no longer delegate. Not about anybody else, but about my own life. I needed to, if it wasn't about finding answers, it was about formulating the new inquiries that I needed to live into. Not so much the answers, but the inquiries. And that the journey was going to be about synthesizing those 40 years into a set of permanent line inquiries, that many of those inquiries were already active in me for 2 or 3 decades, and that I would now need to bring them into a convergence to produce a document, like a testimony, from me to me about where I was, almost as a way of my passport, my personal passport into a new decade, into the 2020s. So the 2020 series that I worked on in 2018 and into 2019, in a minute I'll reveal what that was next part, was me seeking to find a spiritual passport into the coming decade for humanity. And the majority of this work was done at the time from me to me. I didn't have any pragmatic plan about it. There was no business plan associated with it. Again, during all that time, I'm operating, flying at a rarefied space in terms of solo consulting with strategy and innovation work. But at the same time, this is my deepest inquiry. And the 2020 series, just some of the themes, there's some 20 or 30 or 40 themes, but some of the themes to sample it, what I mean by seeking to find original experience. So one of those was this idea of transcending polarities, transcending dualities. But not as a concept, and not as a workshop one person leads another, and not in a way that's even limited for me, because in a way it would have been a derived experience, because obviously there's a tremendous body of work in the world about non-duality, right? But that ultimately originated in Eastern axial practices and religions that are rich and profound and offer tremendous value and transmission throughout the ages. What I recognized at that point in time was that I needed to find out something for myself. I couldn't actually, it was not going to be sufficient to delegate the sourcing mechanism, the originating impulse, to any body of work. I needed to find out what that meant for me in terms of transcending dualities. And that's where the half a dozen or more moves of escaping, transcending, integrating polarities started to emerge in that context. And together inside it was an element that has been central for my work even earlier on in the personal growth and personal development space, and then certainly with leadership teams, where I've been inquiring deeply into latent process technologies. Okay, if I'm with a group for a day, if I'm with a group for 4 days, what can I do to catalyze profound acceleration of a journey? Like do 4 months journey in 4 days. Is it possible? Can I use some process technologies to unlock latent potential in people? And that meant also that I was searching for new language. And together with it, it meant that I was needing to play with updated perception grammar, perception codification in myself, and perception transference. And all that, in a way, made itself into the 2020 series of recordings. And, well, building on the experience of the stop situation scenarios, there was another invisible dimension in it, which was confronting in a more definitive way the capturing nature, the possessive, capturing, egregoric nature of the lower occult, which is a word that describes the idea that the cumulative production and living residue of human life builds an energetic record that together aggregates itself as a loose operating system that is always nearby, available for human beings unless they're able to escape it. And that what that does, primarily, it potentizes in people the great passions. And it specifically potentizes in people the great passions to drive them into polarizing views. And so therefore, if you were to release yourself from the possessive, capturing nature of that entitized version of yourself and discover the more of the human that you could be, it meant that you would need to truly transcend the dualities that you see all around you. And it meant that you would need to birth in yourself and realize that by your very nature as a human, you're not one or two in one, you are a multiplicity in one. And what would that mean, and how could we live into that prospect? That was very much the idea that guided and inspired, not just as a concept, but was the central developmental impulse that catalyzed the work of the 2020 series. And central inside it all was a devotional, petitioning impulse to find help. Because I felt still on the run-up, on the build from the entire decade, that I was desperately looking for help. And that we humans needed for help. And I petitioned for help on behalf of my own experience, but truly, as the study of the human stop situation scenarios reflected, whenever you're grappling with these, you are forever by nature assimilating and you're processing some of those on behalf of your fellow humans. So there is always the practice that whatever you're seeking for, in terms of if you're seeking for blessing, you never are asking for that blessing only for yourself. You're asking for the blessing on behalf of the service function that you may choose or you may find yourself ready to respond to. And it was very much that led to what transpired in 2019, where I didn't have any business plan, but I did go around the world and I conducted several workshops in Israel, in the UK, in the US, around and with the idea of the 2020 series. And that led to what I later recognized was truly a response to a calling to step into function. Now, shortly after I found myself entering this, if you like, a need finding me rather than me looking for a job, the world got shut down with a pandemic. Literally the last, and in several ways, the first Epoch Journey event in person happened in February of 2020. And a couple of weeks after that, we got shut down by the pandemic. And a search began how to go about it. And within few months, I discovered that the stepping into function was really being called into a dual function. The more interior nature of it was what became the Epoch Journey with a global community of nearly 200 people across all time zones, where the premise was that we would journey to retrace the nature of the epochal progression, specifically the 3,500 years, the 3,500 years, and trace multiple plot lines along that journey and research it and codify it through the appreciation of a sevenfold nature, all the way from red through orange and yellow and green and blue to the indigo and violet. Part of the premise being that we have entered the indigo and violet time, where the progression of the epoch culminates, as the epoch transitions to a new phase. But what happened, surprisingly, was that did not want to happen as a singular line. There was a parallel line that appeared that literally launched the Portals project, which enables us to have a context to do this recording. And that's shortly, actually, in that event in February, I met Peter and talked to him about the idea of the Portals project. And we started to develop the approach. And I, for the first time, met Kyriaki in the first Epoch Journey event in July of that year. And the rest is history. Kyriaki has been central to the evolution of the Portals project. So this entire trace I found was necessary because what occurred was that as we embarked early on this epochal progression journey back in 2020 now, what I became highly aware of, I became immediately present to the recognition that this, which we call the epoch culmination conundrum, was going to unlock tremendous amount of insights and perceptions and practices and modalities and new ways of being and new ways of doing and inquiries, and very much, Karen, as you said right at the beginning of the call, that we will need to literally create space, mental space, psychological space, process space, relational space, energetic space, and developing and discovering the way to generate space, which is a very different inquiry to what people sometimes refer to when they talk about holding space. How we were going to do that was going to be very important. So we are recording this at the beginning of 2023, and by the end of 2022, we completed 40 days of those global community journeys, each day 7 hours, sometime more, with a lot of work before and after and so on and so forth. So 40 days, more than 300 hours journey with a global community, where nothing was ever like repeating any ready-made curriculum. It was all an emergent discovery process into which tremendous amount of new ways of exploration, contemplative work, meditative work, artwork, working in pods, working in rooms, on the Zoom, coming back, people creating their own contemplative work and artwork, and so on and so forth. All of that was generated, and very early in the journey, the inquiry of making space was central, which is why it was the first frame that was framed in that box, that loom, the upper one at the left. Now, which is that? So that's why it was placed there as the beginning of the research, recognizing that if we were going to research all other faces of Homo Universalis, and Homo Universalis appeared and emerged as one of the prospective lines of this epochal journey that we were tracking, then to be able to track that and explore that, we needed to make space, new virginal space. We couldn't just come at it. You couldn't just pour the new energy into old bottles. To be scriptural for a minute, you couldn't just pour new wine into old bottles. We all needed to find inside the cathedral within new bottles. And to do so, we needed to generate and make new space. So as we said, we are recording this early in 2023, where I'm proposing that we have entered the indigo interim, very much in that sense that we are in the indigo violet nature of the research. And this is where we have found ourselves engaged with the Universalis Research Project. So that's what I would offer here as a trace of the story, the journey trace. And in the next episode, we will go deeper into specifically space makers and space making, and actually retrace how we embarked on that inquiry initially in 2020 and bring it forward. At this point, it would be appropriate to ask you if you want to say anything about this journey. You, in many ways, participated in this journey. So some of what I was describing, at least of the last couple, 3 years, you were part of that. So, please. I know it's a lot to absorb, but
I can't say I've absorbed it all, but just towards the end, I started thinking about it, thinking about it in a non-linear way, even though you've described it as a trace. And if you imagine a 360-degree circle, and all the threads that you have described, it's as if they all took you to the center, which was that place where you said you were really up against it. I can't remember the exact words, but it was such an incredibly comprehensive overview of all the different threads from your personal storyline, socio-economic, political, religious, everything. And it's stunning, but it had to be that way to get to a point where what I felt so strongly coming from you, which is so powerful, is that I'm hesitant to use the word rebirth. That's a bit doesn't quite say it, but it was some location in yourself where you could truly come from your own life, your own adding up, your own emergence to then step forward and in a way retrace back through those threads, but from a different place. We could call it sort of the double helix, or going through an octave, or there are many different ways of describing it, but you've done it so beautifully, I don't need to. But in that coming outwards, that going through a portal, that journey back, you brought people with you. You allowed people to enter into that space and not go on your journey, but to find their own journey. And just a very small thought popped in as you were describing what you did very thoroughly. I think we're all part of this same storyline and this same trace, because there was a point in my own esoteric journey, I could call it, where I was getting, and I've studied a little bit here and there, and everything was sort of all over the place. There were these threads, those threads, different things that have been told. And the way it turned up with me was that I just put everything aside and I wrote a paper on what I called superimposure, because it's a concept I'd heard, but it allowed, and it didn't even matter what it was about, but something in me needed to put everything together from my own life as a platforming, because from that point on I could, and it was before a certain type of other work came on, which was actually very much of the way of bringing things together. And so I can see in small, we would all have parts where we could think, that echoes in my life, or that does. And it's all part of being able to see our own journey in terms of what we face, what we've overcome, the stepping stones that we've made. And then that brings us into this arena of space and what you were talking about in the end, to do with the service orientation and how that will manifest in every life in a different way. So that's a first reflection on such a story.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Karen, because you just captured in the first thing you said such an important central element in this. Because of the earlier work into the human stop situations, and particularly the leadership stop situation, the teacher-student stop situation, my reading of the trace of what was occurring into the 21st century, the implosion of the guru model, my adding up about that, it became very clear that the only thing that can be credible is where you can embark on a path that will, when you invite other people to come along for the ride with you, number one, that we are embarking on the journey as a mutuality, the mutuality of the human cause, number one. And number two, that you're not trying to enroll anybody into your own journey, but rather liberate them to their own journey. Now, admittedly, the fact that I became financially free and could do this work free of the material need became very important. So that, unbeknown to me in advance, in a way, the journey, teleology of the journey was wiser than mine. I didn't always know why one thing led to another. It's actually easier to describe it now backward. If you stop me at any point in the journey, it would be more difficult to describe. This core element that you're describing, which is if you are mapping an esoteric spiritual developmental path, if it is to become a liberating opportunity for others in how they become activated, psychoactivated, developmentally activated, interior formation activated, faculty activated, then there has to be something about it that's, well, here comes this word, universal, rather than personal. Here comes the entry of Homo Universalis. Kyriaki, anything from you?
Yeah, it's great to hear the story also kind of all together and to see the various threads. It is an amazing story, really, and it's not story, it's real. It's real life. And I'm wondering, there is some kind of magic in this story, but what stays with me from everything you said was that you decided to take up responsibility. I find this a huge step of consciousness, to really take responsibility for your life, for what you know, on behalf of the humans. And I think that creates huge space for things to come. And just to confirm also, maybe we had a parallel story, because I left a career that I worked very, very hard for at 2016. And I think for the next 2 years, I was writing like my personal tenets. Like I wanted to, just for me. And when I first heard, kind of by accident, the 2020 series that you recorded, I was very inspired by the content. I felt a great that it was a great, very revelatory content. Actually, we were gathering, and I didn't know you by then. We were gathering here in Greece in my house, and we were listening to them, and we were talking about it with some friends. So when the epoch started, I was really, really fascinated, and by the whole trace and all the revelations, and especially the transcending polarities aspect of it, and releasing new capacities and being transformational. I think this journey has been very transformational for many other people, including myself. And there are many things to learn from your story. I think it's a great putting together, and especially also the application aspect and the embodiment aspect, and also doing something to the world as well, not just staying within us, but through maybe the portals endeavor, it finds a channel and bridges to the world. So that is another element. But I think also there is an element of being in the right person at the right time, that you got into this wave, and great. It's great that you did it and that we were there as well.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Kyriaki. What I would say to the first point you made about doing this on behalf of people, in actuality, anything we do is always by degree because we are connected to everybody else. So when you do something in your journey, it becomes a bridge to other people. Like in the simplest way, as we know, if you get upset and angry, other people get upset and angry around you. If and when you get humorous and energized, other people around you get humorous and energized. And in the same way, to the degree that you were able to embody in your journey the success of a professional career and actually a decision to not be defined by it and to transition to a next phase inquiry, which happened to coincide and rhyme with the story that I'm telling, that is part of your journey, and that too is something that you can choose to dedicate in your interior meaning-making story as something that made you accessible and available to whatever it is that you have then chosen to serve. So this is the Universalis Project number 1. We're gonna end it here and pick it up in the next episode, where we are about to embark in a deeper way into the inquiry of making space. What does it mean to make space and how to think about this? Thank you very much, Karen and Kyriaki.
Thank you, Aviv. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you very much, Aviv and Kyriaki.
along with our website at portalsofperception.org, Portals is also available on YouTube and on all podcast platforms, as well as social media. You can become an active member and join the conversation in community events. And you can help us get the word out by liking this content and by sharing it with your friends.